You can give like 5 minutes back to the chairs. Okay, so what I will do in the next 10 minutes is to kind of give some idea about how AI assisted self-driving labs could assist in drug discovery. Right, so this is data that I'm sure all of us in in this session will show. I'm not going to the details of this one, but please pay attention to this particular graph. Right, so basically, what has happened in the last, I would say about 50 years or so, is that the the amount that we spend, it's actually increasing with respect to the number of molecules that comes. Right, what is plotted is the number of drugs per billion US dollar expenditure, right? And then with respect to time, right? Again, many speakers will point out that the expense and the time, and then the regulatory issues and things like that. Okay, so why such a long time, or why such a big expense and so on, right? The bottleneck is the cycle and not the science. So what we mean by the cycle, right? The previous speaker spoke about how the drug discovery process is done, right? The science is all is as well established in terms of the biology, chemistry, medicinal chemistry, pharmacology, clinical trials and so on, right? So everything is reasonably well established. Of course, we come up with new techniques and new biology experiments and so on, but the three major bottlenecks. One is the synthetic bottleneck in terms of how fast you can make the molecules that you design. Second one is the decision bottleneck, right? Once you evaluate these molecules, how you use that information to improve your next experiment. And finally, the knowledge, right? Knowledge is usually in the brains of the people who are working on it, and how that's again the third bottleneck. So what is perceived now, right? Again, this is not something that is written on stone or anything, but what is perceived now is that all three bottlenecks could possibly solve, and these technologies are converging about at the same time, right? This is very, very different from all the automations and technologies that has happened in the pharma industry so far. So let's just look at what has happened. One, of course, is the compute, right? What is given in this graph is the kind of AI models and AI technologies that are being seen in just the last 15 years, right? And even last 10 years, I would say, right? So you see that there's a lot more capabilities in terms of what AI can do in many different areas, right? Second, of course, is the cost of the compute, right? The cost of compute in terms of how much we need to actually spend to do a certain computation, right? It's going down, significantly. And then the third aspect is the automation, right? Today we know automation exists in many different areas, right? So the robots or the technologies associated with these automation cost is going down, right? So what if we are able to put together all of these things in a way that it can accelerate the drug discovery process? So let's just quickly differentiate what we mean by a traditional lab versus a autonomous lab, right? In a traditional medicinal chemistry or drug discovery exercises involved with the scientist coming up with an hypothesis first, right? And then that hypothesis tested in the lab, okay? And then these experiments are done manually, and then data is collected, and this goes as a feedback loop to the original hypothesis, and then the hypothesis improved and so on until we're happy with it. We keep continuing the cycle. So what is an autonomous lab? Autonomous lab basically is where you have an AI system which proposes the hypothesis, right? And then a robotic system which does the experiments, and then evaluation or data is basically gotten from these experiments, and then this data can go back and improve the AI models. Let's just take a simple pipeline, right? Where this is related to, again, the previous speaker, what he spoke. There are some things that he covered. So basically, let us assume that I want to come up with new molecules that have a certain characteristic or certain property in terms of binding to a target and things like that. So how do we do? If I want to automate it, first what I have to do is come up with a design, right? So that's the first one. And then the second one is the synthesis planning. I have to basically say, okay, this is my molecule. What is the way in which I can make it in a lab? And then third one, of course, is that I have to have a robotic system which will take these instructions and then perform these experiments. And of course, analytical techniques, and then the measurements in terms of the properties or features that we are interested in, and then that goes as a feedback loop to the original AI model. So how do we do it? This is again the generative model that the previous speaker spoke about. It's simple optimization problem, right? So this optimization is, I'm interested in something, maybe drug binding to a target or improving the pharmacokinetic properties. It could be anything, right? So in principle, what I'm trying to do is an optimization of this particular property against the molecular features or representations. That's basically what we're trying to do. For this, of course, different kinds of techniques that exist, exactly the same kind of techniques that people use, for example, in Claude or ChatGPT, the transformers, or Nano Banana, which is diffusion-based models, right? It's exactly the same kind of technologies, but applied to molecules, and then these can generate, completely new sets of molecules. And of course, the key here is that the filtering that we do, right? Like fail safe, fail early, for example. This has to be based on compute and not via chemistry. So that's where the key is, right? This is something that we have realized a very, very long time ago, right? But then it's not so very successful for many, many reasons we will not discuss. But the key is that, how do we use the compute, whether it's AI or physics-based methods or any of these, to improve the pipelines. So like I said, reaction planning. I'll just go to the next slide. So let us say I want to make a certain molecule, right? In principle, I could train an LLM, large language model, that can understand the reactants and products and then map these two in some kind of a machine translation, in some sense, like going from English to Telugu or Telugu to English. In this case, we are going from reactant to products or product to reactants. So now, there are many other factors, right? It's just not like identifying one thing that works, right? If I have to do something, I have to be able to get those chemicals in the market, right? This kind of experiment should be safe to do in my lab, right? Or the cost should be significantly less, and so on, right? So in principle, you can develop multiple agents which understands these factors, and you can have a software orchestrator to kind of put together this whole pipeline. And then, of course, the AI-assisted robotic synthesis, there are some solutions already exist. I don't think the technology is mature, to the level where we can automate everything, but this is, the early prototypes and early products are, very, very promising, right? So the idea is, just like self-driving cars, you have multiple levels, right? So if you want to achieve the level 5, which is the complete automation in terms of, doing everything, making the decisions on the go and things like that. I'll talk about it in a little bit. This is with respect to characterization. I'll skip. Of course, once you have made, you have to be able to evaluate them. The molecules that you have made, are they useful or not for the purposes that you have, right? So you can use, again, the different models, and then you can, again, have a robotic-based solution for doing the evaluation. For example, let's just take the first the arrow marks, right? So it is it's reasonably easy to automate this, right? With the kind of technologies that we have, and then the kind of AI models that we could train, right? This is a completely doable process, right? Complete automation. But what is more important, or why this will work, or why this is actually better than the solutions that we have today, is because of what we call the closing of the loop, right? So, what I mean is, like, the output is just not a rank list, right? There are no bad experiments. Even if the observation is really, really poor and we are not happy, typically what we do is we throw that experiment away and move on, right? So this is a system which uses all that knowledge and then takes decisions, on the go. So maybe I'll stop with this, this and one more slide. Like, for example, if you want to, automate whatever I have said, right? It is possible to, achieve, results much faster than the traditional ways of doing it. And then one important part, of course, is AI, right? The AI, makes this hardware much more efficient, right? Let's just take, I'm just going to take AlphaFold. I'm sure most of you are aware of this as an example as to why it was so successful, right? Everybody agrees it's a very, very good model, right? That's basically what I had here, right? If AlphaFold had just stayed as a paper, okay, it would have been a very nice paper. People would have celebrated it anyway. But then, if anybody wanted to use it, right, you had to be an expert to use that particular AlphaFold. But that's not what happened, right? If these numbers tell all the story. What is more important is what is on the rightmost side, right? Out of whatever the 3 million plus users that exist today, 1 in 3 of these users are from low and middle class, middle income countries, right? Why is that important? Because it basically shows that it is accessible for everybody, right? Anybody who just has a computer and an internet can use AlphaFold today, right? It's not behind a paywall, it's not, it's pretty good, right? So what actually happened was the right. So, it's just one-click access, you could do everything. Things that we can come up with, all of them will be useful and will be scale, useful at scale only if they are democratized, right? So, and these are the kind of AI technologies that are more useful, but they can come together, right? If I develop my AI technology and he develops his own, she develops her own, right? If none of them can be brought together in a way that you can solve a very large problem, right? It's not going to be very useful. All right, so this part is Dr. covered. So basically, the AI is not going to take away anything from anybody. The whole point is that even if the autonomous labs comes as a reality in few years from now, the tasks change, not the people wouldn't be taken away. So with that, I will just stop here and take any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So any comments from our chairperson, Dr. Rao? Yeah, it was an excellent presentation, and I strongly believe in this. So, very one important point which you mentioned the last, actually, it also throws a lot of interactions and needs a lot of deliberation. As you rightly said, if each one is working in silos and making their own AIs, and of course there are patents and there are so many things which also happens. But true success will happen when the true success, what I say, when we go beyond these boundaries and for the benefit, because we are talking about healthcare. And why AI I am so much passionate, because after doing my oncology, I am into palliative medicine. And if you know, less than 4% people in our country has access to palliative medicine. Now it's humanly impossible for each one of us to remote, when I travel to remote part of the country, so a patient is suffering in a pain, and he eventually goes away in pain. So I feel very sad and I feel myself guilty for that. Because if I have knowledge and if we boost ourselves that we are all tech savvy people, and if we're not able to drive our knowledge to the remote part of the country, then somewhere we have to be blamed. And thereby how we can use the technology. So we are working on a technology, how remotely I can manage that patient. So it's very important. And a question to you, what can be way forward where we can bring all this platform together for the benefit of that one patient who is in the remote part of the country?
I mean, that's not an easy question to answer, right? Because to some extent, we all know the answer for this also, right? See, let us assume that I want to develop some technology, or anybody for that matter, right? So want to, collaborate with, let's say, a hospital or a health, the government health department, and then, the easiest thing that for a hospital or the government set up to say is, on the safest also, right? That's more important. It's safest to say is that I'm not able to give you the data, right? That's the easiest and safest way to say, right? So what that basically means is, if there is a way to bring all the stakeholders, to a point where people come up with a problem and solve them together. That's the only way, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one last question. Anyone from audience? Anyone question? Yeah.
That I think what he mentioned is that we probably, with the help of AI, we can democratize the whole process. So maybe a smaller company can bring a new drug, and that, and then that person in that remote village, maybe it can go to with a much cheaper price, much more accessible.
Yeah, maybe just to add, right, when we say democratization, it does not take the business value away, right? Like AlphaFold, I said, right? The value of that is really, really large, but it still is accessible to everybody.